I was sitting in a lawyer's office when my mother looked me in the eye and said, "That money belongs to all of us, not just you." The lawyer had just read my grandfather's will. $7 billion. All of it left to me. My parents hadn't spoken to me in 5 years. But now, with a fortune on the table, they were sitting across from me with a lawyer of their own, claiming I owed them half. What they didn't know was that my grandfather had anticipated this exact moment. And he'd left instructions that would change everything. My name is Daniel, and I'm 29 years old. My grandfather, Robert Castellano, founded Castellano Industries in 1972. It started as a small manufacturing company in Detroit. He worked the factory floor himself, 16-hour days, 6 days a week. By the time he died last year, the company was worth over $10 billion. Automotive parts, aerospace components, defense contracts. He built an empire. My parents, Vincent and Laura, are his only children. They've lived off his wealth their entire lives. Country clubs, vacation homes in Aspen and the Hamptons, private schools, designer everything. They never worked a real job. They never had to. My father's title at the company was executive vice president, but everyone knew it was ceremonial. He showed up to board meetings twice a year. My mother spent her time on charity boards, not because she cared about charity, but because it gave her status. I was different. When I was 16, I told my grandfather I wanted to work. Not at his company. At a regular job. I wanted to know what it felt like to earn a paycheck. He smiled and said, "I think that's the smartest thing I've ever heard." I got hired at a local hardware store stocking shelves for $9 an hour. My parents were humiliated. My mother told me I was embarrassing the family. She said, "What will people think when they find out a Castellano is working retail?" My father said I was ungrateful. That I was spitting in the face of everything my grandfather had built. But my grandfather, he drove to that hardware store every Saturday morning and bought something. Light bulbs, screws, duct tape, things he didn't need. Just so he could see me. Just so he could tell me he was proud. That was the beginning of the divide. My parents saw me as a disappointment. My grandfather saw me as hope. By the time I was 24, I'd stopped going to family dinners. Stopped answering their calls. I moved to Portland and built a life without their money. I worked at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated people find housing and jobs. I made $38,000 a year. I lived in a 500-square-foot apartment. I was happy. My parents called me selfish. They told extended family I was going through a phase. That I'd come crawling back when I realized how hard the real world was. My grandfather called me every Sunday. We'd talk for an hour. He'd ask about my work. About the people I was helping. He never once asked when I was coming back. He understood. The first time I realized my parents saw me as a problem, not a person. I was 19. I'd been accepted to Portland State University on a partial scholarship. I was covering the rest with student loans and a part-time job. My parents could have paid for it outright. They spent more on my mother's handbags than my tuition cost. Instead, my father told me at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of the whole family, that if I wanted their help, I needed to prove I was serious. He said, "You've always been difficult. Daniel, if you want our support, you need to transfer to an Ivy League school and study business. Otherwise you're on your own." I asked why. He said, "Because we're not funding mediocrity." My grandfather was sitting at the head of the table. He didn't say anything that night. But 2 days later he called me. He told me he'd pay off my student loans when I graduated. He told me to follow my own path. He said, "Your parents think success is about prestige, but real success is about purpose. Never forget that." The second time I was 22 and working as an assistant manager at the nonprofit. I loved the work. It didn't pay much, but it mattered. I was helping people rebuild their lives. My parents showed up unannounced at my apartment one Saturday morning. I hadn't seen them in over a year. My mother walked in, looked around at my small bedroom with its thrift store furniture and peeling paint, and started crying. Not sad crying, disgusted crying. She said, "This is what you chose. This is what you threw away your family for." My father didn't even sit down. He stood by the door like my apartment was contaminated. He said, "You're an embarrassment. Do you know what people say about us? That our son works at a charity shop like some kind of social worker." I told them to leave. My father said, "You'll regret this. When you're 40 and broke and have nothing to show for your life, don't come begging to us." They didn't speak to me for 6 months after that. My grandfather visited me 2 weeks later. He didn't call ahead. He just showed up with coffee and bagels. We sat on my tiny balcony and talked for 3 hours. He told me about the early days of his company. About how people told him he'd fail. About how his own father said manufacturing was a dying industry. He said, "Your parents don't understand you, Daniel. But I do. They think wealth is the goal. But wealth is just a tool. What matters is what you build with it. And you're building something real." I asked him why he stayed with them. Why he still gave them money when they clearly didn't respect what he'd done. He said, "Because they're my children. I can't change who they are." But you're my legacy. You're the proof that I did something right. The third time I knew things were broken beyond repair, I was 26 and engaged to my girlfriend Emma. She was a second-grade teacher. We met at a community center where she volunteered teaching art classes to kids. She made $42,000 a year. She had student debt. She drove a 12-year-old Honda. And she was the kindest, most genuine person I'd ever met. My parents weren't invited to the wedding. I didn't tell them about it. They found out through my aunt, who saw the announcement on social media. My mother called me, furious. She said, "You're getting married and you didn't even tell us. You're cutting us out of your own wedding." I said, "You haven't spoken to me in 2 years. Why would I invite you?" My father got on the line. His voice was ice. He said, "If you go through with this wedding without us, without our blessing, you're dead to us. Not just for now, forever. You'll never be part of this family again." I said, "I've been dead to you since I was 16. This just makes it official." I hung up. My grandfather was my best man. He paid for the wedding. Nothing extravagant, just a small ceremony at a vineyard with 50 people. He walked Emma down the aisle because her father had passed away when she was young. He gave a speech at the reception that made everyone cry. He said, "I've built a lot of things in my life, buildings, companies, wealth, but the thing I'm most proud of is standing here today watching my grandson marry a woman who loves him for who he is, not what he has." Daniel chose love over money, purpose over prestige, integrity over inheritance, and that's why I'm prouder of him than anyone I've ever known. He looked right at me when he said it. I'll never forget that moment. My grandfather died 10 months after my wedding, massive heart attack. He was 87 years old. He'd been healthy, active, sharp as ever. And then one morning, he didn't wake up. I was devastated. I flew back home immediately. The funeral was massive, over 1,000 people. Business leaders, politicians, employees, people whose lives he'd changed. My parents showed up in designer black. Armani, Prada. They looked like they were attending a gala, not a funeral. They didn't cry. My mother networked. I watched her laugh with business associates an hour after the service, discussing vacation plans. My father was on his phone during the reception, checking stock prices, sending emails. I couldn't stand it. I left early. Emma and I went back to our hotel and I broke down. She held me while I cried for hours. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my grandfather's estate attorney, Marcus Delgado. I'd met him a few times over the years. He was sharp, professional, loyal to my grandfather. He said, "Daniel, your grandfather left specific instructions for the reading of his will. You need to be there. So do your parents. It's scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m. I asked what it was about. He paused. Then he said, "You'll see. Just make sure you're there." The reading was scheduled for the following Monday. I flew back to Michigan. Emma came with me. When we walked into Marcus's office, my parents were already there, sitting on a leather couch, whispering to each other. They looked up when I entered. My mother's face was cold. My father didn't acknowledge me at all. I sat on the opposite side of the conference table. The tension was suffocating. Marcus entered with a thick folder and a locked briefcase. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time. I'm going to read Robert Castellano's last will and testament as he requested." He opened the folder. The reading took 20 minutes. Most of it was legal language, distributions to charities, pensions for longtime employees, bequests to distant relatives. And then Marcus got to the main clause. He read it slowly, clearly. "I, Robert James Castellano, being of sound mind and body, leave the entirety of my estate, including all assets, properties, and shares of Castellano Industries, to my grandson, Daniel Vincent Castellano." My mother gasped. My father stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "That's not possible," he said. His voice was shaking. Marcus handed him a copy of the will. "It's notarized, witnessed by 3 independent parties, legally binding." My mother started crying. Real crying this time. Loud, ugly sobs. She said Dad wouldn't do this. He wouldn't cut us out. We're his children. Marcus's voice remained calm. "He didn't cut you out. He left you both a trust fund, $2 million annually. For life. Indexed to inflation." My father slammed his fist on the table. $2 million. That's nothing. We're his children. We built this with him. I sat there frozen silent trying to process what was happening. Marcus continued. "Robert also left a letter for Daniel. He requested it be read aloud, in front of everyone present. He handed me an envelope. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, handwritten in my grandfather's careful script. I started reading out loud. "Daniel, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I'm guessing your parents are in that room with you, furious, confused, betrayed. Let me explain. I built Castellano Industries with my bare hands. I started with nothing. I worked 16-hour days in a factory that was 110 degrees in the summer. I sacrificed time with my family. I missed birthdays, holidays, school plays. I did it because I believed I was building something that would give my family security. Freedom. Opportunity. But your parents didn't learn the value of work. They learn the value of taking. They've spent their entire lives living off my money. They've never once asked what it cost me. They've never once tried to understand the sacrifices. You're different. When you were 16, you got a job at a hardware store. You didn't have to. You wanted to. You wanted to understand what it meant to earn something. When you were 19, you chose a state school and took out loans rather than let me pay for an Ivy League education you didn't want. When you were 22, you worked at a nonprofit for poverty wages because you believed in the mission. When you were 26, you married a teacher. Not an heiress. Not someone who could elevate your status, a teacher. Because you loved her. I paused. My throat was tight. My mother was sobbing into her hands. My father was staring at me with pure hatred. I kept reading. You're the only person in this family who understands what I built. Not the money. The principle. The work. The sacrifice. That's why I'm leaving it to you. Not because you're my favorite, but because you're the only one who won't destroy it. Your parents will fight this. They'll claim it's unfair. They'll say you manipulated me. They'll try to contest the will. Let them. I've made sure they'll lose. But Daniel, I need you to do something for me. Protect what I built. Not just the company. The people. The employees. The 15,000 families who depend on Castellano Industries for their livelihoods. Don't let your parents destroy it out of greed. And don't let them destroy you. You're stronger than they'll ever be. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I trust you. Grandpa. I folded the letter. The room was completely silent. Then my father spoke. His voice was low, dangerous. This is bullshit. Absolute bullshit. We're contesting this. Marcus didn't even blink. You're welcome to try Vincent. But Robert anticipated that. He included a no contest clause. If you challenge the will and lose, you forfeit the trust fund. Permanently. All of it. My mother's head snapped up. What? Marcus repeated himself. If you contest this will and the court rules against you, you get nothing. Not 2 million a year, nothing. My father's face went red. No court is going to uphold this. It's clearly undue influence. Daniel manipulated him. He isolated him from his family. This is elder abuse. Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out another document. Robert also anticipated that accusation. 6 months before he passed, he had a full psychological evaluation conducted by 3 independent psychiatrists. All 3 concluded he was of sound mind, free from coercion, and fully capable of making his own decisions. He also recorded a video deposition explaining his decision in his own words. Would you like to see it? My parents went silent. Marcus set up a laptop and pressed play. My grandfather appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his study, the same room where we'd had so many conversations. He looked directly into the camera. His voice was strong, clear, unmistakable. If you're watching this, it means someone is trying to claim I wasn't in my right mind when I made my will. Let me be very clear. I am of sound mind. I've thought about this decision for over a decade. My son, Vincent, and my daughter-in-law, Laura, have never worked a day in their lives. They've taken everything I've given them and demanded more. They've lived in luxury funded by my labor, and they've never once expressed gratitude. My grandson, Daniel, is different. He's worked since he was 16. He's chosen purpose over profit. He's chosen integrity over inheritance. He's the only person in this family I trust with my legacy. This is my decision. No one forced me. No one manipulated me. No one pressured me. This is justice. And if Vincent and Laura are watching this, know this: I gave you everything. And you learned nothing. The video ended. My mother was shaking. My father stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out without a word. My mother looked at me one last time. Her eyes were full of rage and desperation. She said, "You'll regret this," and followed my father out. The door slammed. I sat there, stunned, trying to process everything. Marcus closed the laptop. He looked at me and said, "There's one more thing." He pulled out a third document. Your grandfather also left a provision. If your parents contest the will, this report gets released to the press and the IRS. He handed it to me. It was over 100 pages. A forensic accounting report detailing every financial transaction my parents had made in the last 20 years. Charitable donations they'd claimed for tax deductions but never actually made. Business expenses they'd inflated. Personal purchases they disguised as corporate costs. My grandfather had hired investigators. He had receipts, bank statements, emails, everything. If they fight you in court, Marcus said, this goes public. And they'll face criminal charges for tax fraud. Wire fraud. Maybe more. I stared at the document. I looked at Marcus and said, he really thought of everything, didn't he? Marcus nodded. He loved you, Daniel, and he knew exactly what kind of people they were. He spent the last 5 years of his life preparing for this moment. 2 days later, my parents' lawyer called Marcus. They were dropping the contest. They'd accept the trust fund. But they had one condition. They wanted me to release a public statement saying the will was fair, that there were no hard feelings, and that we were still a family. Marcus asked if I'd agree. I said no. If they want to accept the terms, fine. But I'm not giving them cover. I'm not pretending this is okay. My parents released their own statement the next day. They told the press that I'd manipulated my grandfather, that I'd isolated him from his family in his final years, that I was greedy, ungrateful, and morally bankrupt. The story went viral. I was painted as the villain who stole his dying grandfather's fortune. For 3 weeks, I didn't leave my house. Reporters camped outside. Strangers sent me death threats online. Emma and I stopped reading the news. Then the forensic report leaked. I don't know who leaked it. Maybe Marcus, maybe someone at the estate. Maybe my grandfather had planned for that too. But suddenly, every major news outlet was running stories about my parents' fraud, the fake charity donations, the inflated expenses, the tax evasion. Investigators estimated they defrauded the IRS of over $2 million. My parents tried to deny it. They claimed the report was fabricated. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements. Emails where my mother discussed hiding purchases. Text messages where my father joked about write-offs. Within a month, they were under formal investigation by the IRS and the FBI. Their lawyers advised them to settle. 6 months after the will was read, my mother called me. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. She was crying. "Daniel, please, we need to talk," I said. "About what?" She said, "We made mistakes. We were wrong about a lot of things. But you're destroying us. The IRS is going to take everything. We'll lose the trust fund, we'll lose the house, we'll lose everything. Please, you have to help us. You have to make this stop." I let her finish. Then I said, "You called me an embarrassment when I worked at a hardware store. You told me I was dead to you when I didn't become what you wanted. You showed up to Grandpa's funeral and laughed with strangers an hour after he died. You tried to take everything he left me. And now you want my help." She said, "We're family, Daniel." I said, "No. You were family when it was convenient. When it benefited you. Now you're just two people I used to know." She started sobbing harder. "Your father is sick. The stress is killing him. If you don't help us, he's gonna have a heart attack." I said, "Then he'll understand what Grandpa went through building the empire you tried to steal." She hung up. A week later, my father called. He didn't cry. He yelled, "You self-righteous piece of shit. You think you're better than us. You think you earned that money. You didn't do anything. You were his favorite because you kissed his ass your whole life." I stayed calm. I said I loved him. "There's a difference." He said, "We're gonna fight this. We're gonna take you down. We have lawyers. We have connections. You're going to regret this." I said, "You already tried. You lost. And if you keep going, you'll lose everything." He hung up. 3 months later, the IRS reached a settlement with my parents. They had to pay back $2.3 million in back taxes, penalties and interest. Their trust fund was garnished to cover it. After legal fees, they were left with about $400,000 a year. Still more than most people make in a lifetime. But not enough to maintain the lifestyle they'd built on my grandfather's money. They sold the Aspen house. They sold the Hampton house. They sold their cars and bought something practical. They moved from their mansion to a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt nothing. That was a year ago. I've spent that year learning everything I can about Castellano Industries. I've promoted 3 longtime employees to executive roles. I've increased wages across the board. I've launched scholarship programs for employees' children. Every major decision I ask myself, what would Grandpa do? The company is thriving. Revenue is up 18%. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. And every day, I get emails from workers thanking me for caring about them the way my grandfather did. My parents haven't called since that last conversation. I heard through my aunt that they're still angry. That they still tell people I'm a thief who stole their inheritance. That they still believe the money should have been split equally. But I don't care anymore. Because I know the truth. My grandfather didn't leave me $7 billion because I was his favorite. He left it to me because he trusted me to honor what he built. To protect the people who depend on it. To understand that wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with it. And that's the lesson my parents will never learn. Wealth means nothing if you don't know what it costs to build it.